This is the 21st video of the Forged Fiction series. If you haven't seen the other videos in this series, check out the Forged Fiction playlist on our channel. You can click on the link in the description or click the card in the top right corner of the screen. Earlier in this series, we discussed Paul's letter to Philemon. That is the shortest letter of the New Testament. Jude, however, is the shortest forged letter in the New Testament. Jude is a diatribe against scoffers. The author asserts that false Christians have infiltrated the churches of the true Christians. The letter is hard to date because of its brevity and its ambiguity. I think the letter can be reasonably dated to the late 1st century, but more on that later. What is known for certain is that 2 Peter takes much of the imagery from Jude and was therefore written afterwards. 2 Peter, as discussed in the last Forged Fiction video, was probably written in the early 2nd century. The letter of Jude isn't addressed to a particular church or a particular person. To this day, it remains unclear as to whom the author is addressing. Before even getting started, we need to address the authorial claims of the letter. Jude, a servant of Jesus Christ and a brother of James. Jude 1. There's a lot to unpack here. The names Jude and Judas are identical in Greek, but the labeling brother of James suggests this author has a well-known relative named James. In the Bible, the only Jude-James kinship is that of Jesus' actual brothers. I think it's pretty clear the reader is meant to think this was written by Jude, the brother of Jesus. Furthermore, the identification of Jude as a servant suggests knowledge of the letter of James, since the author of James also identifies himself as a servant of Christ. That letter has already been discussed in this series. The argument for this letter being a forgery is also supported by the language the author uses. The writer uses very good Greek. He uses such words like autumnal and wandering, language that's rather specialized. The author has a high usage of parallels, figures of speech, vivid symbolism, and wordplay. The author's great knowledge of language can also be seen by his knowledge of Hebrew. Let's take a look at Jude 12-13. These people are blemishes at your love feasts, eating with you without the slightest qualm, shepherds who feed only themselves. They are clouds without rain, blown along by the wind, autumn trees, without fruit and uprooted, twice dead. They are wild waves of the sea, foaming up their shame, wandering stars, for whom blackest darkness has been reserved forever. The author here is using wording found in Hebrew, not in Greek. In 3 references to the Old Testament, his vocabulary doesn't correspond to that of the Septuagint, the Greek translation of the Old Testament. The author also knows of and probably quotes the book of 1st Enoch, which is now seen as an apocryphal book written in the 2nd to 1st centuries BCE. Evidently, he probably knew the Aramaic version. This means the author of Jude knew Greek, Hebrew, and Aramaic. They were certainly very well educated. This is not something you would expect from the son of a laborer in 1st century Galilee. Some parts of the text also went through intentional scribal changes that shouldn't be overlooked. One of these changes still appears in almost half of the Bible translations today, so I think it would be useful to take a look at it. The change occurs in Jude 5. Though you already know all this, I want to remind you that the Lord at one time delivered his people out of Egypt, but later destroyed those who did not believe. The variation in many Bibles is with the word Lord. Some manuscripts, and consequently many Bibles, suggest the word should be Jesus. This change probably arose to fight against the adoptionist teachings, which suggested Jesus was the adopted Son of God, and therefore not equivalent to him. Because of the knowledge of James and the later usage of this text by the author of 2 Peter, we can reasonably conclude this was written in the late 1st century, possibly around the year 90, but that's just an estimate. One thing we can actually be even more certain about than its date is that this letter was not written by Jude, the brother of Jesus. But that's all for this week. Check us out on Facebook and Twitter, and if you like the content, please consider dropping a like and subscribing. And if you really love us, consider supporting us on Patreon. Make sure to click that bell to get notified when we make a video, and check out our new website. Be sure to share if you learned something, and we'll see you next time.